Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight to hear updates on the Normandale Lake Water Quality Improvement Project. My name is Erica Snagowski. I'm a staff member at the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District. Randy Anhorn is also here tonight with the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District, along with Jana Kiefer and Keith Pilgrim from Barr Engineering Company. A few logistics to start with. While the presentation is going on, please have yourself on mute. If you accidentally unmute yourself during the presentation, staff will mute your microphone for you. If you have questions during the presentation, you can put those questions in the chat box. How you do that is you click on that chat bubble and you can type your message in the chat, and staff will try and respond to those messages during the presentation. If you have additional questions that we can't answer during the presentation, we will be going into breakout rooms following the presentation where staff will be available to answer questions and have discussion about Normandale Lake. With that, let's get started. On behalf of the staff and managers at the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District, thank you again for joining us here tonight. The 9 Mile Creek Watershed District is a public entity that works to protect and restore the water and natural resources in the 50 square mile land area draining to 9 Mile Creek. We serve the residents, property owners, and visitors of the cities in our district: Bloomington, Eden Prairie, Edina, Hopkins, Minnetonka, and Richfield. The 9 Mile Creek Watershed District has a 5-member board of managers appointed by the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners. The district also has 4 full-time staff members that work to fulfill the mission of the district and the goals found in our water management plan. We are also lucky to have a Minnesota Green Corps member serving with us this year. To understand the Normandale Lake Water Quality Improvement Project, it is important to understand the history and characteristics of this lake. Normandale Lake is a constructed lake built for flood control that was envisioned in the district's very first water management plan in 1961, shortly after the district was formed in 1959. The lake was eventually constructed in the late 1970s in partnership between the city of Bloomington and the district. It is currently about 116 acres in size and has a 3-foot average depth. It has served its purpose of helping to protect downstream infrastructure from flooding many times. Normandale Lake works well at meeting the goal of flood control. However, it is a shallow lake in an urban environment, and it has a very large drainage area. This map shows that 21,000 acres of land from 6 different cities drain to Normandale Lake through the 9 Mile Creek system. This large watershed area brings pollutants flowing into the lake from 9 Mile Creek, including both phosphorus and nitrogen, which can fuel algae growth. Having to work with a large watershed area and the creek system flowing through the lake increases the complexity of managing Normandale, as we not only have to work to meet the goals of the Normandale Lake Water Quality Improvement Project within the lake, but also work upstream to reduce the amount of pollution flowing into the lake. The district has implemented a series of projects upstream in the past and continues to implement projects that will help improve the health of Normandale Lake. This has included projects from repairing and stabilizing stream banks to reduce the transport of sediment and nutrients downstream to conducting alum treatments in upstream lakes such as Bryant Lake. Alum treatments reduce the release of phosphorus from lake bottom sediments. The Bryant Lake project was so successful it allowed the lake to be removed from the impaired waters list in 2018. Additionally, the project had downstream effects as water quality improvements were observed in Lake Smetana in the past decade and are in large part due to the projects implemented in upstream Bryant Lake. The district's upstream projects and trickle-down effects are a key piece to the overall health of Normandale Lake, although it is important to understand that even with upstream management, the developed nature of our watershed will cause 9 Mile Creek to be a continued source of nutrients and pollution to Normandale Lake. The district also has a regulatory program and a cost share program through which projects are installed that contribute to water quality improvements throughout the district, including Normandale Lake. Permits are typically triggered by development or redevelopment, and cost share grants are available for projects done on a voluntary basis. This map shows the locations of both cost share projects and permits. An example of a project that might be installed either through the cost share program or as a result of a regulatory project is a rain garden. Rain gardens collect stormwater runoff and allow it to soak into the ground instead of the water and any associated pollutants flowing to 9 Mile Creek or a local lake or pond. Although one rain garden and a watershed may not change water quality, the cumulative impact of many individual projects can help. I've talked about the challenges that a large urban watershed brings for lake management. But what about the lake itself? How do the characteristics of Normandale Lake influence its management and lake health? Normandale Lake is a shallow lake, which means sunlight reaches the bottom of the lake, allowing plants to grow throughout the lake. Healthy shallow lakes have a variety of native plants growing throughout the entire lake. The plants take phosphorus and nitrogen from the lake water, reducing the amount of nutrients available for algae. Aquatic plants also provide habitat for insects, fish, and other wildlife. Without aquatic plants, shallow lakes tend to be dominated by algae and turbid, or not clear, so it's important to maintain the native plant population in Normandale Lake. Although 9 Mile Creek flows through Normandale Lake, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency considers Normandale a shallow lake. Shallow lakes have different water quality standards than deep lakes or creeks. Normandale is not currently listed as impaired by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. However, past and current monitoring have shown phosphorus levels in the lake above state water quality standards. Chlorophyll A and water clarity have historically met state standards. Barr Engineering will discuss water quality monitoring results in more detail shortly. Despite the lake not currently being listed as impaired, the district is working to achieve state water quality standards through its management actions in Normandale. Before I provide a brief summary of the management actions we have taken at Normandale to improve water quality and the ecological health of the lake, I want to provide a brief background of how we got to those actions and why. In 2005, a Use Attainability Analysis, or UAA, was completed, which was a scientific assessment of Normandale Lake. The UAA provided both a water quality assessment of the lake and information on potential management actions. Following this, the district received a petition from the city of Bloomington in 2007 for the district to complete a project at Normandale Lake. From 2007 to 2016, the district continued monitoring Normandale Lake and reviewing water quality data. The district also worked with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on what management options would be allowable under the permit that was issued by the Corps during the construction of the lake in the late 1970s. As previously mentioned, Normandale Lake is a complicated system. As such, detailed modeling was undertaken in 2016 to 2017 using the collected monitoring data to better understand the lake processes, and the report came out in 2017. From this report, the district asked Barr Engineering to prepare an engineer's report. The engineer's report is a project feasibility study and preliminary project design, and allows the district board of managers to evaluate the project goals against its policies. Following review of the report, the board can accept the report and order projects, which the board did for the Normandale project in 2018. In 2018, a volunteer environmental assessment worksheet was also completed for the project, and the district began implementing the Normandale Lake Water Quality Improvement Project in 2018. The detailed modeling that was done in 2016 to 2017 gave us a good understanding of the issues facing Normandale Lake and informed the types of projects that we would need to implement to improve the health of the lake. One of the issues that came out of the analysis was that there are often low oxygen levels at the bottom of the lake. Low oxygen can cause a number of problems, from putting stress on fish and increasing the phosphorus release from lake bottom sediments to also causing odor issues. In addition to low oxygen levels, it was noted that there were high levels of phosphorus in the lake that came from the large watershed area that drained to Normandale Lake, and also from the release of phosphorus into the lake from lake bottom sediments. The analysis also called out that the abundant aquatic plants in the lake play a large role in ecology and nutrient cycling, and that it's important to maintain a healthy native aquatic plant population in Normandale Lake. One of the other issues prior to project implementation was that there was the aquatic invasive species curly-leaf pondweed in the lake in large amounts. Curly-leaf pondweed displaces native plants and also has an unusual growth cycle that can cause problematic conditions in a lake. It actually starts growing in the winter under the ice, and so has an advantage over our native plants that start growing later in the spring. And then it dies off midsummer, and when it dies off and starts to decompose, it actually uses up oxygen and can be a cause of low oxygen conditions. And it also can release a pulse of phosphorus at that time as well that can contribute to growth of algae. In lakes with large curly-leaf pondweed populations, this management can be important for water quality and overall ecological health of a lake. It is difficult to manage, however, because the seed-like structures that are called turions are difficult to kill, and you need to do a drawdown of the lake and expose the lake sediment bed to freeze these structures in order to manage the plant. Now that I have discussed the issues Normandale Lake was facing, I'll go through the management approaches that we have implemented to address those issues. To work towards the goal of improving water quality and the ecological health of Normandale Lake, the district, in partnership with the City of Bloomington, has so far implemented a lake drawdown, alum treatment, and herbicide treatment at Normandale Lake. The lake drawdown and herbicide treatment have worked towards managing curly-leaf pondweed, an aquatic invasive species, and the alum treatment worked towards controlling internal phosphorus loading. The district is implementing these projects in a phased approach and conducting monitoring to evaluate the results of these projects. Barr will present the results of our monitoring through 2020 tonight. The next potential steps for Normandale Lake would be installing an oxygenation system and trying out aquatic macrophyte harvesting. These projects would be as needed based on the goals of improving water quality and the ecological health of the lake and following 2 to 5 successive years of herbicide treatments on the lake. Randy Anhorn, our district administrator, will talk more about our adaptive management approach for Normandale Lake following the discussion of our monitoring results. Although many of you are probably familiar with the first steps of our projects, I do want to provide a quick summary for those of you that aren't before we get into our monitoring results. A drawdown is one way to control curly-leaf pondweed, as a winter freeze of the lake's sediment bed, when the lake is empty of water, can kill the curly-leaf pondweed turions, thus stopping the curly-leaf pondweed's reproductive cycle. Managing the level of curly-leaf pondweed will help protect and improve the native aquatic plant community in Normandale Lake. Normandale Lake was drawn down in the fall of 2018 and allowed to sit empty of water over the winter, and then the lake was refilled in March of 2019. In May 2019, an alum treatment was conducted at Normandale Lake as part of the second phase of project implementation. An alum treatment is when a lake is treated with a buffered solution of alum to reduce the release of phosphorus from lake bottom sediments. When phosphorus is released from the lake bottom sediments, this is called internal phosphorus loading, and the goal of an alum treatment is to reduce this internal loading. The phosphorus during an alum treatment actually becomes bound with aluminum and can't be recycled back into the water column. And this is how the availability of phosphorus to fuel things like algae growth can be reduced. An herbicide treatment was conducted at Normandale Lake in May of 2020. This herbicide treatment targeted remaining curly-leaf pondweed following the 2018 drawdown of the lake. It was anticipated following the drawdown that follow-up herbicide treatments would be needed to manage remaining pockets of curly-leaf pondweed in the lake. Our original plan for the first herbicide treatment in 2020 was a whole lake treatment. However, following spring plant surveys in 2020, it was shown that lower levels of curly-leaf pondweed in the lake allowed for a partial lake treatment. We do anticipate doing another partial lake herbicide treatment to manage remaining curly-leaf pondweed in the lake this spring, but we will do another plant survey to determine the necessity of a treatment and delineate treatment areas. If we move forward with the treatment, we will hire a licensed herbicide applicator to complete the treatment, and we'll also complete follow-up plant surveys in the fall to determine the success of that treatment. Another piece that the district has been looking at in Normandale Lake is the carp population. Carp are an invasive species of fish that cause water quality problems due to their bottom feeding behavior. They stir up lake bottom sediments, reducing water clarity and releasing phosphorus. They also uproot aquatic vegetation, destroying habitat for waterfowl and aquatic communities. The district conducted fish surveys in 2018, 2019, and 2020 to assess the carp populations in Normandale Lake and understand any potential impacts from the drawdown on the fish community. What we found from these fish surveys is that carp populations likely exceed what is called an ecologically damaging threshold, which is 100 kilograms per hectare. This means that carp are likely causing problems in Normandale Lake, and management efforts are needed. The other thing that we have found from our fish surveys is that we do have a strong native fish community, and this native fish community is currently strong enough to control carp recruitment, which is a good thing. In 2020, we also undertook some carp management efforts, and through these efforts, we were able to remove over 5,000 carp from the lake. Where we think we need to go in 2021 is to continue to refine carp population estimates. We need to get a better handle of how many carp are actually in the lake to understand how many we need to take out of the lake to get below what is that ecologically damaging threshold number. And so we want to get that population estimate, and we want to undertake additional carp removal. Additionally, the district may want to look at further assessing carp movement. So overall, in 2021, the district will continue trying to remove carp from the lake while we understand the best ways to manage the carp population in the lake.
Good evening. This is Jana Kiefer, and I'm a Senior Water Resources Engineer with Barr Engineering Company. My colleague Keith Pilgrim and I are going to summarize some of the monitoring results that the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District is using to help evaluate the effectiveness of the management activities that have been undertaken in recent years. As Erica mentioned, the goals of the Normandale Lake Water Quality Improvement Project are to improve water quality and the ecological health of Normandale Lake. The district's monitoring efforts help to understand how the lake system is responding to the management activities and measure the effectiveness of these activities as it relates to the project goals. Keith will be discussing the district's water quality monitoring results, including 3 of the primary indicators often used for lakes in Minnesota: phosphorus, algae, and water clarity. Then I will be sharing some monitoring results pertaining to the effectiveness of the lake drawdown and herbicide treatments in reducing the amount of the invasive curly-leaf pondweed in the lake and the impacts of the district's management activities on the native aquatic plant community.
I'll be talking about water quality monitoring in this section. The district uses water quality monitoring as a method to assess the conditions, the ongoing condition of district area lakes, as well as assess the outcome of watershed management efforts, as well as in-lake efforts on lake water quality. You can see in this map that for Normandale Lake, there are 2 locations that water quality monitoring is conducted. On the east side is a yellow star and also a red arrow that shows where water is monitored in the lake. At that location, surface water samples are collected. Typically collected as what's called a 2-meter composite, so it represents the surface water quality of the lake. They also take a bottom sample at that location, and they also take measurements, routine measurements of temperature, dissolved oxygen, specific conductance, and pH from the surface to the bottom to assess the entire water column condition. The other yellow star you can see in the northern area of this figure also has a red arrow, is where inlet samples are taken so they can assess the effect of surface water quality on the water quality of the lake in general. The parameters that they typically measure are phosphorus, chlorophyll A, and Secchi disc. Phosphorus is a limiting nutrient, so it is often controlling the abundance of phytoplankton and often controlling, which in turn often controls the clarity of the lake. The clarity is assessed using what's called a Secchi disk, and the Secchi disk is simply put into the lake until it's no longer visible. And when it becomes unvisible when you're measuring in the field, as you put the Secchi disk in the water column, that's the Secchi disk depth. I described it a little bit more later on as well. And then chlorophyll A is a surrogate measure of the total abundance of phytoplankton in a lake. Phytoplankton, also referred to as algae. These three parameters, I should also mention, are used by the state to assess the condition of Minnesota lakes that actually are state standards. And these state standards are then used to determine whether or not a lake is meeting its beneficial use or its intended in use. And these things are assessed over a 10-year period. In my presentation, I will be discussing these different criteria and how Lake Normandale is meeting them. As I mentioned previously, phosphorus is one of those parameters that the district measures in lakes to assess their condition. And this is a graph showing total phosphorus in Normandale Lake at that location I showed, which is the east side of the lake. And these measurements are the surface water sample measurements. So phosphorus is always used as an indicator of the conditions of lake because it is the limiting nutrient. Oftentimes it is what's controlling lake clarity and controlling phytoplankton growth. I've also put on the shallow lake standard, which is 0.06 milligrams per liter or 60 micrograms per liter. You can see that on this slide as the horizontal red line. I've showed average summer total phosphorus concentrations from Normandale Lake during monitoring years from 2002 to 2020. Also showing the line that denotes between pre-drawdown and post-drawdown total phosphorus. One thing to note is that total phosphorus concentration is very stable over time in Normandale Lake, and it has also been stable before and after the drawdown, hovering around that 60 microgram per liter range, sometimes above and sometimes below. To note 2016 is a high year, and I'll talk about that a little later. One of the reasons why total phosphorus is so stable in Normandale Lake, despite climatic variability and the large watershed, really is the presence of aquatic plants and the attached filamentous algae on those aquatic plants. The aquatic plants do use quite a bit of phosphorus to grow, and so they are often pulling out quite a bit of phosphorus from the water column of the lake, despite whatever is going on with inflows and outflows. Those plants are very important in keeping this system stable and minimizing large fluctuations in total phosphorus in the Normandale Lake water column. On the previous slide, I showed a graph of total phosphorus, and total phosphorus is accumulation of different components, actually, which include different types of phosphorus, and one of those types is called orthophosphorus. I have that on this graph on the right axis. Orthophosphorus is that fraction of phosphorus that's most readily usable by phytoplankton for growth. And I just wanted to demonstrate how orthophosphorus concentrations can change the concentration of phytoplankton measured as chlorophyll A in the lake. And this is just to demonstrate why we are focusing on phosphorus and why we target that as part of our management efforts. On the left axis, you can see chlorophyll A, and that is also the red line in the graph. And then on the right axis is ortho P, which is orthophosphorus, and that's the blue line on the graph. And you can see, for the most part, as orthophosphorus changes, so do the concentration of the phytoplankton measured as chlorophyll A. And you can see that in mid-August, you can see that ortho P spiked up, and so did the chlorophyll A population, or the phytoplankton population. The alum treatment that reduces phosphorus coming out of bottom sediments of the lake reduced orthophosphorus, and that's one of the reasons why we did the alum treatment. I should also mention that phytoplankton needed another nutrient called nitrogen and as well, they use nitrogen in concert with orthophosphorus. So both of these parameters or micronutrient constituents can be limiting for phytoplankton growth, and that is the case in Normandale Lake, where both of those, phosphate as well as nitrogen, limit phytoplankton growth. One of the things we like to do before we take any management actions on a given lake is to thoroughly understand how that lake is functioning. And this graph shows you something that we noticed in Normandale Lake early on, and that is that Normandale Lake has a great capacity to absorb and remove phosphorus from the water that's coming into the lake. And in Normandale, it's 9 Mile Creek. This graph shows inlet concentrations as well as concentrations near the outlet of the lake in the east side, which is the normal monitoring location for Normandale. The red line is the inlet, the blue line is in-lake, and I'm showing total phosphorus if I haven't mentioned that before. Shallow Lake Standard is also shown on this lake. What you notice is there's a gap between the red and the blue, which is what's coming in, and it actually leaves the lake. What that indicates is that a lot of phosphorus is actually being removed. The first dot on the far left in the spring, the red and blue dots in the spring there, show a certain gap. So most of that phosphorus probably in the spring is being removed simply by settling of particles. Phosphorus is often attached to particles, and that can settle out to the bottom. As the aquatic plants and filamentous algae begin to grow in a lake, you can see that that gap gets bigger as we head into June, July, August, and September. So that shows that the aquatic plants and the filamentous algae are actually picking up quite a bit of phosphorus and removing it by incorporating that phosphorus in their plant and filamentous algae tissue. This had the effect of limiting the availability of phosphorus for the phytoplankton in the lake, reduces phytoplankton blooms, and overall, these plants are actually competing for that limiting nutrient in the lake. And so this signaled to us it was very important not to have an effect on the aquatic plants as we manage Normandale Lake. The less aquatic plants we have, the higher the phosphorus will likely be in the lake water column, and the more available will be for phytoplankton, that are potentially increasing phytoplankton blooms if we have an adverse effect on aquatic plants. So that was a priority for us, is to not affect this relationship, which is controlling the clarity of the lake. So there are different sources of phosphorus to Normandale Lake, and I did show previously phosphorus coming into the lake from the lake inlet. But the other source actually is the lake bottom sediments. When oxygen gets low in the lake, phosphorus actually comes out of the bottom sediments and into the water column. This can be taken care of by doing what's called an alum treatment to immobilize the phosphorus in the lake sediments. The alum actually settles in the sediments and binds phosphorus and stops it from coming out when oxygen gets low. So the reason I'm showing these graphs is basically to answer the question why we did the alum treatment. In 2016, we took measurements at the lake surface and the lake bottom in the area which we're calling the deep hole of the lake. And in that year, it was particularly clear that phosphorus was coming out of the lake bottom sediments. And the reason we know that is it's a higher concentration in the bottom than the surface. So that the blue line there in the left graph shows the phosphorus accumulating in the lake bottom, and it's much higher than the lake surface. And we also knew from doing some other studies that the bottom sediments do contribute quite a bit of phosphorus to the lake water column. You have to think back to the previous slide where 2016 was one of the worst years for phosphorus in Normandale Lake that we've recorded since the year 2002. So this was a pretty easy management activity to undertake to begin to control phosphorus in the lake. I'm showing 2020 on the right graph, the surface and the lake bottom, which shows the same blue and red line representing surface and bottom of the lake, the blue line being the bottom, the red line being the surface. And you can see the blue line is nowhere near where it was in 2016. It is elevated a little bit above the surface and this is largely because of the settling of attached phosphorus to particles, such as I mentioned in the previous slide about the inflowing phosphorus and how some of it does actually settle to the lake bottom. So here it is accumulated in the lake bottom in 2020, but nowhere near to the degree that it did in 2016 prior to the alum treatment. This slide shows the concentration of chlorophyll A in Normandale Lake. Chlorophyll A is a surrogate for phytoplankton, and we measure phytoplankton for various reasons, but one is that they are the predominant determinant of the clarity of most lakes. And a misbalance between nutrients and lakes results in excessive chlorophyll A concentrations in phytoplankton in lakes. So I'm just showing the phytoplankton concentration measured over the summer, June to September, in Normandale Lake from 2002 to 2020, also denoting the pre-drawdown and post-drawdown period between 2018 and 2019, 2019 being the alum treatment to reduce internal load. So one thing we can notice here is that chlorophyll A is actually quite low for most years. It can be more variable than phosphorus, and for the most part, Normandale Lake readily meets the shallow lake standard for chlorophyll A for shallow lakes. One thing to note, 2019 and 20 are similar to the pre-drawdown, a little bit higher than just right before drawdown, lower than 2016, which was that higher internal load year. But for the most part, within the range of historic concentrations of chlorophyll A. 2020 being a little bit higher than other years, and possibly could be because of a little bit reduced aquatic plant and filamentous algae growth in 2020, but we really don't know if that's the case until we monitor for a number of years into the future here to assess the overall benefits of the drawdown and alum treatment and the management efforts of crudeleaf pondweed. A very nice direct measurement of the clarity of a lake, how far you can see into it, is a measurement called a Secchi disk measurement. It is simply a disk that you actually lower into the water to see until it disappears. And when you can no longer see that disk, the monitoring person marks down what that depth was. So higher numbers are good, indicating greater clarity, and lower numbers mean less clarity for a lake. And so you can see also on this graph a historical rendering of average Secchi disk over the course of a summer in Normandale Lake, like the previous graphs. And I've also put the shallow lake standard down there for comparison or reference as well. And you can see Secchi disk from 2002 to 2020, and you can see it ranges anywhere from about 1 to 1.8 meters depth, which is anywhere from 3 to 6 feet approximately. You can see the Secchi disk depth measured before and after the drawdown, 2016 and 2019 being very similar, 2019 being kind of an adjustment year where things were equilibrating after the drawdown and after the alum treatment, and 2020 being a lower year compared to the past. But it should be noted that all years are meeting the shallow lake standard, similar to chlorophyll A that's also been measured in the lake. I just want to make a note about dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen is one of those parameters the district routinely makes at Normandale Lake and most of the district lakes. It is a measurement that you take with a meter that measures how much oxygen is actually in the water itself, and we take measurements from the surface to the bottom of the lake at the east section of the lake, which is our routine monitoring location. So dissolved oxygen is really important because aquatic life needs it, so fish need oxygen, and at times Normandale Lake can have quite low dissolved oxygen in the water column, and sometimes it's low enough to cause internal loading, which has been prevented now with the alum treatment. However, it still has value to think about this, because dissolved oxygen is one of those things that if it is low, then you can have this hydrogen sulfide smell with the rotten egg smell, which some people have noticed around Normandale Lake. And so I thought I'd just show a comparison here of dissolved oxygen in the water column, which is an average from the surface to the bottom in this graph, for comparable months from 2018 and 2020, one being prior to the drawdown, which is 2018, and 2020 being after the drawdown, as identified in previous graphs. So you can see the dissolved oxygen has, in general, improved comparing 2020 to 2018. However, this is just only 1 year, and we will see what happens this year and subsequent years if dissolved oxygen still does improve. This is kind of an aggregate measure of what's going on biologically in the lake, and it could be that in 2020 the overall mass of aquatic plants in the lake was a little bit less. Aquatic plants can cover the lake surface and prevent the diffusion of oxygen from air into the water column. So it is possible that some changes in the aquatic plant population mass, not composition, but mass, may have resulted in higher oxygen in August and September. But it's also possible that happened to do monitoring periods and different climatic factors that could have an effect. So we'll watch this, and this is one of the things we will watch and maybe do more monitoring to get a better handle on dissolved oxygen throughout the year in Normandale Lake. In addition to the measurement of chlorophyll A in lakes, which is an aggregate measure of the total phytoplankton population of lakes, the district also measures for the actual composition of those phytoplankton. And this graph shows the composition of phytoplankton in Normandale Lake in 2010. And just quickly, I'll show some of the different species. The green bar there in the lake shows the number of green algae per milliliter that is sampled. And the green algae are what we typically think of as algae. The blue bar there shows the cyanobacteria, or the blue-green algae in the lake. The yellow is Bacillophyta, which is also it's called diatoms, and they're a little bit unique in that they have a cell structure that includes silica. And then we also have a very dominant feature in Normandale, that brown bar, which is Cryptophyta, which actually is a species that's very good at surviving under low light conditions, which I think may be there because of the dominant dominant aquatic plant population in Normandale, which causes shading. This graph is a continuation of the same kind of data in the previous graph for year 2014, showing the relative composition of those different species that I talked about: green algae, blue-green algae, or cyanobacteria, and diatoms in this Cryptophyta species as well. As you can see, it's variable throughout the year, but you can see that the blue-green algae are often commonly found in August, when we'd have phytoplankton blooms in the lake. But I should point out that these are overall very low numbers and then correspond to the low concentrations of chlorophyll A in the lake as well. This slide shows the same kind of data for 2016, phytoplankton composition: green, blue-greens, as they're called, or cyanobacteria, the diatoms, and the Cryptophyta as well. You can see, again, similar patterns, a little bit more greens compared to blue-greens in this year. On the next slide. And here we have the data for 2020. Unfortunately, we didn't collect data from June and July in this year, but you can see we do have August, which is that year where we typically have higher blue-green algae counts compared to the other 2 months. But you can see the composition is similar to past years. Overall, phytoplankton concentrations somewhat similar to the past years as well in terms of numbers of phytoplankton per milliliter. You can see the composition is similar, except the cyanobacteria perhaps are a little bit lower in 2020 compared to past years. So this ends the conversation about routine water quality monitoring that the district takes in the lake. And I'll be passing it on to Jenna Kiefer, who will be talking about curlyleaf pondweed, the drawdown, and aquatic plants in Normandale Lake.
Thanks, Keith. I'm now going to walk you through some slides showing the results of our aquatic plant monitoring as it pertains to growth of the invasive curlyleaf pondweed. This graph is showing the results of the June point intercept surveys for Normandale Lake from 2016 through 2020. A point intercept survey involves establishing a grid of monitoring locations throughout the lake and then sampling plant species at those locations using a rake. This helps to understand what species are present throughout the lake and how dense they are. The bars shown on the graph in red represent the number of locations throughout Normandale Lake where curlyleaf pondweed was collected on the sampling rake. As can be seen on the graph, the number of locations where curlyleaf pondweed was collected has decreased following the drawdown in the winter of 2018 and 2019 and the 2020 herbicide treatment. When conducting the point intercept plant surveys, rake fullness ratings for curlyleaf pondweed are also collected, which are a surrogate for the measurement of the density of plant growth. The rating scale includes no observances, visual observation of a plant, but no collection on the rake, or collection on the rake with a density ranging from 1, which is a low density, to a 3 or 4, which would be a higher density. As shown on this slide, the June 2018 plant survey indicated widespread curlyleaf pondweed growth, with most locations showing a rake fullness rating of a 1 or 2. In June 2019, following the lake drawdown, the number of locations where curlyleaf pondweed was observed or captured on the rake was decreased, and the rake fullness ratings were generally 1s. In June of 2020, the number of locations where curlyleaf pondweed was observed or captured on the rake was further decreased, with the rake fullness ratings generally 1s or 2s. Measuring the biomass of curlyleaf pondweed found in Normandale Lake is another method we've used to assess effectiveness of the drawdown and herbicide treatments in reducing curlyleaf pondweed. The bars on the graph show the average biomass of curlyleaf pondweed per sample location from 2017 to 2020 based on grams of wet weight. Comparison of the data from before and after the winter of 2018-2019 drawdown indicates that the amount of curlyleaf pondweed biomass in the lake has decreased. Another way the district has been evaluating the effectiveness of the drawdown and herbicide treatments is by measuring the density of turions. Turions are the primary reproductive structures of the curlyleaf pondweed and are found in the lake bottom. They are brown, typically about a ½ inch in size, and look like sharp, small pine cones. As Erica mentioned, the goal of the drawdown was to freeze or kill as many turions as possible to reduce future growth. A survey conducted in the fall of 2019 after the drawdown found some turions remaining in the lake sediment, although generally in low or very low densities. As shown in the image to the left, turions were generally found along the stream channel that remained unfrozen and flowing throughout the winter of the drawdown. A patch of turions were also found in the northeastern portion of the lake in 2019. The turion survey conducted in the fall of 2020 found turions in fewer sampling locations than in 2019. Many of the locations with remaining turions were again along the stream channel in low or very low densities. I do want to note that for those of you that may have attended the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District's February 4th workshop, a similar slide was presented, but the images showing the results of the turion survey were mislabeled as June 2019 and June 2020 instead of the fall. The survey that was conducted in the fall of 2019 was conducted in early November, and the survey conducted in the fall of 2020 was conducted in mid-October. This slide offers an additional summary of the turion survey results from 2019 and 2020 that were visually shown in the previous slide. Turions were found at 14 of 50 sample points in 2020, as compared to 19 sample points in 2019. 36 live turions were found in the fall of 2019, and 21 live turions were found in 2020. Most of the turions found in fall of 2020 were small, which may indicate they were produced by plants that germinated from seeds after the 2020 herbicide treatment. While results from the fall turion monitoring showed reductions in turions, the year-over-year differences were not found to be statistically significant. Maintaining or improving the health of the native plant population in Normandale Lake is an important part of the district's project. A healthy aquatic plant population provides good habitat for fish and other aquatic life. It also helps maintain the relatively stable lake water quality, uptaking some of the nutrients that flow into Normandale Lake. The graph on this slide shows the variation in plant species in the lake during June of 2018, 2019, and 2020, based on the point intercept plant surveys. The blue bars show the number of sites where each plant species was observed in 2018 before the drawdown, and the green and yellow bars show the number of sites where each plant species was observed in 2019 and 2020, respectively. As can be seen in the graph, the prevalence of certain species has varied from year to year. This variability is to be expected, especially following a lake drawdown and winter freeze. In 2020, some species were observed at more sites than in 2018 before the drawdown, including Elodea, Potamogeton pusillus, small pondweed, Ceratophyllum demersum, which is coontail, filamentous algae, and Stoechania pectinata, which is sago pondweed. Another method of measuring the health of a lake's aquatic plant community is through what's called a Plant Index of Biological Integrity, or a Plant IBI. The Plant IBI method was developed by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources and includes two metrics. The first is what's called species richness in a lake, and that's essentially the number of plant species present. And the second metric is what's called the quality of the species, and that's measured by something called the Floristic Quality Index. So the graph that I'm showing you here is measuring species richness. And so what it essentially shows is the number of plant species in the lake based on data collected by the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District from 2002 through 2020. As shown, the lake has been meeting the DNR target of at least 11 plant species for the monitored years since 2009, including the years following the drawdown and herbicide treatment. Although the graph is not included in this presentation in the interest of time, the plant community in Normandale Lake also has met the Floristic Quality Index goals set by the DNR in 2019 and 2020. As mentioned previously, a healthy and abundant aquatic plant population plays an important role in maintaining the ecological health and water quality in Normandale Lake. Results of the plant biomass surveys show that the overall plant community in the lake has rebounded following the lake drawdown. The green bars show the average biomass per sample location, measured as grams of wet weight. Sampling in June of 2019, directly following the drawdown, showed reduced plant biomass in comparison to pre-drawdown levels. However, results from August of 2019 and June and August of 2020 show that the overall plant biomass estimates are within the range of estimates from pre-drawdown monitoring, which is a good sign. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Randy Anhorn, the district administrator, to conclude the presentation.
Thank you, and I want to thank Erica, Jana, and Keith. I am Randy Anhorn, the administrator at 9 Mile Creek. So far this evening, we've kind of gone through how we've gotten to the point of implementing the phased 9 Mile or Normandale Lake Water Quality Project, what the objectives were, water quality, overall ecological health of the lake, and what management practices we have implemented thus far. Keith and Jana went through pre-project and current project water quality. One clarification I did want to make on Keith's slides when he looked at the shallow lake standards on second transparency, chlorophyll A, and phosphorus, which are the basic trophic status indicators for lakes. Those summer averages, June through September, we're taking at the far eastern, the deep open water portion of the lake. I think it's known as Site 201. That's also actually when I worked at the Met Council, that's where we took our samples and our water quality data for the lake, which is also where state standards come from. It's the open deep water part of the lake. So it wasn't the inlet, it was the far eastern side. So tonight, I just wanted to highlight a little bit what's next. Some of that we've talked about a little bit. As shown on the slide, Erica talked about shallow lakes being difficult as part of our approach through our engineering our engineering report. We're trying to go slow so we don't tip the lake one way or the other from being in the turbid or a plant state to a turbid state. So we wanted to implement our projects and then have a year monitoring project, so we can assess how close we're getting to our objective without really screwing things up. And that's basically what adaptive management is. Again, since this is a phased approach, multiple year project, generally in our normal lake monitoring program, we monitor our lakes on a rotating basis. However, when we have a drawn out situation like this, we monitor more frequently. So we've monitored in 2018, 19, 20. We'll do it again in 21 as we keep implementing these things so we can evaluate our past projects and our current management strategies that we have going on. A little bit about those current management strategies. One big component throughout the watershed is education and outreach. We try to talk to not just in the Normandale 30 square mile watershed, but throughout the watershed on what residents can do and what they do on their land, how it can affect downstream receiving water resources. So like chloride use right now on slippery driveways, if we use too much, it melts, it goes down the into the storm sewers down to the creek, and in fact 9 Mile Creek is listed as impaired for chlorides. Fertilizer use. For a long time, Keith mentioned that we have phosphorus limited systems and nitrogen limited systems. What that means is in a phosphorus limited system, there's enough nitrogen that it's the phosphorus that is driving the productivity, the plant growth, the algal growth. In the nitrogen limited system, it's the other way around. So since most lakes in Minnesota are phosphorus limited, one big education and legislative push happened back in 2004 and 2005 when we banned phosphorus in fertilizers in Minnesota. It first started in the metro area and then it went out to the other 80 counties. So for lawn care and turf care, if you cannot prove that your system needs it, you cannot put, or it's illegal to put fertilizer with phosphorus on it on your yard. Now, what we heard tonight is at times, Normandale Lake is nitrogen limited. So even though you take the 0 out of the middle of fertilizers, there's still nitrogen in that fertilizer. So our education outreach program, we're going to start shifting gears in some areas, expanding what we are currently doing, and promoting that fact, educating on nitrogen, on that number, on maybe better practices on fertilizer use, on natural yards instead of having to have a super green yard. So that's one thing that we have coming up next year. It's another current practice. Erica mentioned reducing upstream watershed-based nutrient loading. She had a graph of past projects, Bryant Lake, the North Fork of Edina Stream Bank project, which reduces sedimentation and nutrient loading. We actually have a South Fork from Minnetonka going down to Normandale coming up in the next few years, but we have past projects that the district has done, cost share grant projects that we help finance. But also, she mentions our permit program. One thing that's interesting about that, it's a very good cost benefit for us. Pre-2008, the district did not have a stormwater management rule as part of its permit program. A lot of our stuff was flood control based. 2008, we implemented stormwater volume and water quality requirements and standards as part of our permit. So now when a permit applicant comes in and redevelopment happens, they have to meet that volume to reduce runoff and water quality to reduce nutrient load off of their site, which before they didn't have to do. So you look down France Avenue, you look at Southdale Mall where we have a lot going on. We love redevelopment. That's great because we're getting treatment where we never had treatment before. And then more specific, Erica already mentioned this, more specific to Normandale Lake itself. We'll continue our carp management to address the internal nutrient loads and to provide a more healthy fish population. last year we got 5,000 fish. We're going to try to refine and better define the nurseries so we can be slightly more successful on the number of fish that we pull out, or carp that we pull out of the system. Also, we'll continue our herbicide treatments on curly-leaf pondweed, again focused on curly-leaf pondweed, to again address internal loading and promote a healthy and native plant population. As Keith had mentioned, that's important for the keeping the phosphorus sequestered in those plants. And you can move it forward one time, Erica. So following that, Erica on one of her slides had mentioned continual herbicide treatments as we continue the adaptive management approach to see if what we're doing is starting to move us toward our objective. If we're unable to make it to that objective after those 2 to 5 years of herbicide treatments and carp management, there are other tools in the toolbox we would potentially look at. Our engineering report that the board accepted back in 2017 also included 2 other things. We would evaluate the needs for them at that time. We would work with our partners. Our key partner is the city of Bloomington. We would also work with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, for they would have to permit us to implement these other options. One that Erica mentioned is aeration, or an oxygenation system to address low dissolved oxygen levels in the lake, to help prevent the generation of that foul-smelling hydrogen sulfide or rotten egg smell. To keep the lake sediments aerated, to keep that internal loading from happening, or at a minimum to again reduce the algal potential for algal blooms, and to provide oxygen to the fish species that can survive low, or to fish that cannot survive low oxygen conditions. Carp can, however, some of the prey fish and even sport fish cannot. Those fish are needed to keep the carp at bay. They eat their eggs and they eat the young, so that helps balance out the fishery. And you can move to the next one, Erica. And then the other option would be plant harvesting, aquatic plant harvesting. We did talk to the U.S. Army Corps about this to be in our initial game plan at the time that we started this program of the drawdown and the alum treatment. They oversee the lake. You see the line in the middle there. We would not be allowed to do any vegetative control or harvesting, I should say, on that side of the lake. They do allow limited around the boat access to provide recreational out to the deeper open water part of the lake. I think that the city, in fact, used to do some harvesting around the lake and at that boat ramp access. However, we would not be allowed to do that there. Actually, the purpose of our aquatic plant harvesting anyway would not be to remove the biomass of the native plant population. We're really looking at just taking the top foot or so off of the floating areas of the plants and the floating plants, which would include the filamentous algae. This would help increase the oxygen transfer from the air to the lake water column. And one other thing to note would be, because of the size of mechanical harvesters and the shallowness of the depth of the lake, it would be only for a portion of the lake where we could actually get, or the deeper areas where we could get the boat into. I think you can go forward one more time, Erica. So that being said, and we looked earlier this evening, we tried to evaluate the water quality of the lake. Most of that was on water quality monitoring information, chemistry, Secchi transparency, plant surveys, turion counts, things that we can put a scientific number to. So we can look at trend analysis over time. Are things getting better? Are they getting worse? Are they staying the same? And really not concentrating on year to year as much as a span of time. So the data means something, and we bounce out some of the year to year climatological things that might be going on. That being said, since we looked at the water quality and the scientific information, we acknowledge that there are other other ways to evaluate and observations to evaluate the lake's condition. One of that would be filamentous algae. It is out there. It is not pleasing. Keith mentioned that there might be some actual benefits to it because it does sequester phosphorus. However, at times when it's biodegrading, it can add to the smell. Same thing with low oxygen. We can have odor, the rotten egg smell throughout the year. Aquatic plants. There are areas of a lot of aquatic plants. That again was not the objective of our project, was to get rid of the native plants. We wanted to get rid of the curly leaf, which dies back. So it then re-releases the phosphorus. We're hoping when we get back to that, manage the curly leaf, that it would allow more options for the natives to come back in and help us as part of the overall management of the lake. And then we've also heard concerns about blue-green algae and blue-green algal blooms. To date, we haven't run across any in-lake blue-green algal situations. Keith mentioned blue-greens, we mentioned greens. Greens are unharmful, not harmful. Blue-green algal blooms can be harmful when you have a concentration of them high enough. They can produce toxins that can result in health risks for pets and for humans. And depending on the level of the toxins, could be, and the use, it varies on that. If you want to go to one more slide, Erica. So to date, again, I mentioned we haven't run across on the times that we've monitored Normandale Lake at our monitoring location, where we have come across high levels, the highest being 8,000, I think it showed in August of 2010 and 8,000 in August of 2016. However, I just wanted to walk through our protocol when we see issues and monitor issues of blue-green algae. So we monitor lakes again on a rotating basis. We've been monitoring Normandale Lake more often recently than we normally do. When we go out, we're not on every lake, we're not every year monitoring phytoplankton or blue-green algae. That being said, when we are on our way out to a monitoring location, if we see a potential blue-green algal bloom, if we're monitoring the lake for phytoplankton or not, or we go out to the monitoring location, the deep open water spot, if we see potential blue-green algal bloom, we take a sample, bring it back to the lab and expedite our microscopic analysis, trying to determine what the main species are in that sample. Separate it between the ones that Keith had mentioned, green and the others. But the cyanobacteria or the blue-green algae, that's what we're really interested in. And then we'll do an enumeration. And when we get those numbers, we follow this chart on the World Health Organization thresholds and guidelines. If you look at the second row across, if we have counts between or over 20,000 blue-green algal cells per milliliter and less than 100,000 cells per milliliter, World Health Organization rates that health risk level as a low probability. That being said, when that happens, we put that information on our website. We say high blue-green algal counts on Lake Arrowhead Lake in Edina, and we'll say it relates to a low probability. That being said, best case is when in doubt, stay out. If it looks green and soupy where you're at, contact the city with the same information. We will contact the Pollution Control Agency and the Department of Health because they track that. And if there's another stakeholder, such as Three Rivers Park District, or if there's a lake association, they will be contacted as well. Generally, the city puts that information on their website and their social media, similar to us. We will let the city know if there's a city park or Three Rivers Park District, if they have a park there, because it's public property, that they may want to post. And the WHO, World Health Organization, recommends that they post signs there. The next row across, very similar, 100,000 to 1 million. That relates to a health risk level of moderate probability. Same thing. We actually had 3 lakes this year up watershed of Normandale that had those levels. We contacted the city. We contact all the other stakeholders, same as us. We put it on our website. In that case, Edina actually had a park, and they put signs around the park advising the health risk. There's actually an article in the paper, the Sun Current talked about it. Also on that lake, we were done monitoring in mid-September. However, concentrations were still high in mid-September, still high counts. So we had our monitoring staff from Barr go back out again. They didn't collect water quality data at that time, but they went out specifically to collect phytoplankton so we could do an analysis, so we could relate to the city and residents that that effort or that threat has been below that threshold. And again, we haven't seen that issue on Lake Normandale, but this same criteria we follow for Normandale as we do other lakes. So when we went back to the other thing, the other observations, we have our scientific data. There's other observations, other ways to look at the lake's condition. We've heard various things from various people. We've heard that, like the filamentous algae in the odor, some say it's better, some say it's worse, some say it's the same. That's kind of another reason for tonight's community meeting, is to answer your questions on our project. We're going to break out into breakout rooms, get feedback from you on your thoughts and observations on the current lake conditions, especially compared to past lake conditions, and then also hear your concerns, which we will compile. We have a couple managers here. We'll have one in each breakout room, but we'll compile that information and bring it back to our board for their discussion and their consideration. We also have a survey on our website for the same thing that will be up for a while for those that couldn't attend tonight. And, interested in, some basic questions like, how would you define a successful project in an urban shallow lake such as Normandale Lake? How would you define success? Also, we've talked about phosphorus and nitrogen as being a problem on Normandale Lake. What actions would you personally be willing to take to try to limit that nutrient pollution to the lake? We talked about fertilizer use. Was that something that would change the way you use things if you knew that was an impact on the lake? Basically, that's all I have. We've kept you here quite a long time, but we're going to go into breakout rooms and try to answer those questions and compile your comments.